Hi, Mark.
Hey, Karen.
Good to see you.
You too. Yeah,
Thanks for coming and for chatting with me about real-world evidence today.
absolutely.
So Cosmos is a collaboration, as you know, between a bunch of the different organizations that use Epic, and they've all agreed to contribute de-identified data for the purposes of advancing care and research.
Yes, I'm excited to see all the tools that can come out of the Cosmos database that can be used for patient care. Me as a clinician still seeing patients, I'm not a researcher, but I can still use Cosmos data to make great treatment decisions. Example, I have a 63-year-old patient who has struggled to control her hypertension, and I know what the guidelines say I should be using. She's already on some of those medications. I know what the trials did to get those drugs to market, but what might be next for my particular patient? Thinking about her comorbidities, the drugs that she's already tried, I have this tool powered by Cosmos called Best Care Choices that I can look up and see what would be good treatments for my patient based on her comorbidities, her current, life status.
I mean, we think a lot about intelligence and artificial intelligence making our work better and helping us deliver better care. And this is kind of like a data intelligence. It's like real world evidence intelligence that's driving our ability to make better decisions for our patients.
You're absolutely right. It is truly a powerful medicine changing the way to think about treatments, and it complements, not replaces, but complements those other data sources.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about what real world evidence is. It's a little bit different from some of the other sources that we're used to using as physicians, right, for decision making.
Right.
So we've, for a long time have used things like textbooks, guidelines, our clinical experience, randomized controlled trials, and this is sort of a new thing.
Yes.
So this is really data that presents what actually happened to real patients.
Sure.
And not under controlled experimental conditions.
Right. Guidelines are great. They give us a basis to start with. What if my patient doesn't fit every one of those guideline criteria? Randomized controlled trials, absolutely great too. They help bring things to market and bring new treatments. But again, they can't control for all the different variables that happen.
So let's think about the results that you're seeing for this patient and how they might be different from, let's say, a randomized controlled trial where patients are randomly selected to be given a treatment. Now, in this case, patients are receiving different treatments, but what might be behind that besides, being chosen for that particular treatment? What else could be there that we're not seeing?
There's a lot that we're not seeing. We're seeing things like, what does my insurance cover? Do they prefer this medication versus that medication? And honestly, can my patient afford that treatment too? In randomized controlled trials, it's given. They're trying it out and providing for free, but what happens in real life? We're not all perfect.
Yeah.
And there are things that happen that we need to be able to factor in to our clinical decision making. And I think providing some of that real world evidence on outcomes of these treatments does give us a glimpse into real life.
Yeah. So there's so many factors that might influence why a patient is receiving a particular treatment in the data.
Yes.
But I think one of the cool things about the data, given that breadth and richness, is that we can try to personalize that cohort matching as much as possible, to control for as much as possible. So let's say you're exploring the real world evidence and you see a result that surprises you. Maybe it maybe contradicts something that you've learned in med school or something that you've read about in a trial. It has a different kind of result. How do you put those things together?
I think you still need to look at that with an open mind, and try to figure out why that was happening. Yes, compare it to your guideline knowledge. Yes, compare it to your RCT knowledge. But if it is something surprising, try and think about those other factors.
Yeah, let me drill into that point a little bit more, because I think one of the things that can happen is that a patient might receive a certain medication, not because it works better for them, but because they have more severe disease, and so they're preferentially prescribed that medication. And so the outcomes that you see might be worse for them because there's sort of this confounding between the disease severity and
Yes.
which medications they're receiving. But the personalized cohorting actually tries to control for that a bit, because no data source actually tells the whole story, right?
Absolutely not. There are limitations to randomized controlled trials. There are limitations to guidelines, and there's limitations to real world data as well. I think the more data, the better. And always think back to your patient in front of you. I can't stress that enough.
So it's kind of, you're still in
Yeah.
charge.
Absolutely.
Are as
You're still the provider. It's still your best judgment, but more data to make a better informed judgment decision.
all right. So let me try to recap a bit here. When you are looking at these data, along with all the other sources of evidence that you consider, what's sort of your decision-making framework?
I think I look at it in a couple different ways. First, what am I seeing? What is unique to this patient? What am I not seeing too? But then ultimately, the big one is, how do I apply this to my patient? Applying the guidelines, applying knowledge from trials, and then from real world data. Knowing what is best for my patient, what has happened in real life with patients similar to her. That is that framework. And I think if we think about things that way, it'll help guide us to those best decisions.
Do you want to take us back to your patient, kind of going through that framework?
So when I'm looking at the best treatment for her hypertension, I get options of how to treat her and get results from real world data for short-term and long-term outcomes. And I can do something simple as turn the screen to show my patient why this is relevant to her. Show what I matched on in best care choices and provide that connection to the patient, which I think is a valuable tool for trust in healthcare.
Yeah. I'm sure that really resonates with patients to be able to see themselves reflected in data and feel like you are using all available evidence sources to drive the best care possible.
Absolutely. And being able to tune that to her specific comorbidities, her age, her lab results, things like that, really show that nice personalization touch that is also appreciated.
Definitely. When you show this kind of data to patients, or when you talk through them, do they think it's a prediction of their future?
I don't think it's necessarily a prediction, because every patient is unique and their experience is going to be unique. It is not necessarily a prediction of their future, but it could be where they are headed.
Yeah, great. History, not destiny.
History, not destiny.
And this idea of evidence-based care being available to every patient, not just the ones who are well represented in the traditional evidence base,
Absolutely.
is fantastic. All right, so we've talked a lot about how we can look at treatment outcomes in patients like yours. Now, what are some of the other things that we could do with real evidence for patients like yours to support decision-making?
I think there's a lot of different ways, and we're just scratching the surface. There's lab data. There's diagnoses we could be looking at. I could even, not know what I'm seeing with a patient right in front of me, and observational data can tell me the next diagnostic step to try and figure out what might be going on with my patient. There's a lot of different areas that this observational data we have the framework for. We can personalize it to our patients and use that in so many different areas to make their lives better.
So real world evidence for patients like mine. And I think the good thing is that this framework that you've talked about, what am I seeing? What am I not seeing? How does this apply to my patient and scenario? Applies across all those different cases.
It does. It's so exciting.